Welcome to the Tone Lounge Podcast, the definitive music industry and gear podcast with Jonathan Gilmet and Frank Fleckenstein.
And we're rolling. What's up, people of the internet? This is the Tone Lounge Podcast number 3. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing mighty fine. Yourself?
Not too bad, apart from a lot of snow coming down overnight and causing a little bit of a chaos. But yeah, I mean, it's that time of the year, is it?
It is. And the snow for Christmas is a plus. It's better than rain.
It is. Oh yeah, it definitely is better than rain. And I do remember a couple of years ago, we actually had a Christmas with something like 16 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow.
Which actually caused us to decide, okay, this year we're gonna have a barbecue instead of putting the bird in the oven. So
makes sense, right?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And then normally we spend the December and like some of January in Chile, which is
okay.
It's the summer down there now. So obviously then it's a whole different thing.
That's gotta suck, man. Seriously. You know,
yeah,
nice weather,
terrible.
South America. Man, poor you. Seriously.
It's terrible. I don't know how I held up.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have been depressed, you know. Man, nice weather, great food, great people. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing down there. It's I really love being in Chile. Every time we go there, I'm having such a blast. It's just it's a beautiful country. And if you wanted to, it has all the climate zones. You know, it's 4,200 kilometers long. So it has deserts, it has mountains, it has a whole area that is like green because there's forests everywhere. So it's amazing.
It kind of reminds me,
part
the
of
way
the world.
you're describing it, kind of reminds me of Peru, because that's also like that, right? You have the Andes, which is more like desert climate, but also like right on the cusp of the rainforest. So yeah, then they got desert. They have all the, I don't remember how many microclimates they have, but they sure have a lot for such a small country.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know that it was the same for Chile, but that's cool. I'm going to have to go there at some point.
Yeah, you should definitely. It's an absolute worth making the trip. And it's a long trip for that matter. So
oh yeah.
If you're flying, if you're flying out of Europe, you're gonna have a layover somewhere, most likely London or Madrid or something like that, and then you're sitting in that stupid tube for like 13 hours or something until you reach the capital, and it's never ends.
You know, even from Canada right up there,
anyways,
going there, it's like 22 hours. So yeah, it's
really?
I feel your pain. Oh yeah, it's still long even in North America going down there. So I mean, there's a few layovers, but it's still kills you. So anything new in the news?
Oh, damn it. Yeah, I thought we would start with something that you are actually able to talk about today, and you mentioned a little bit, and I'm excited to hear more. So today is, or the day this podcast launches, is Thursday, the 7th of December. So
right.
What's going on? Let me hear it.
There's going to be a lot of videos on YouTube. People are going to complain because there's too much, and now I'm part of that little select group of people coming out with a bunch of pedals, but I wanted to do it differently.
Okay.
So what we have today is this guy. So it's the Wampler Tumnus, but it's a Germanium version. So I'm doing a video on this. Actually, I'm filming it today. We're Monday. So I'm filming that, and I'm also shooting it out against the Archer and the original Tumnus. So I'm going to have basically 3 videos. So there's going to be the main video and these two, and if it's possible, if we can, we're going to link it in this podcast, so anyone that's interested can go and watch it. But basically, they sent this out to me without any notice or information. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And Richard from Wampler was like, hey, we got something new. Are you interested? I was like, sure. He's like, okay, I'm going to send it in the mail, but I had no clue what it was. And it takes so long for stuff to get to me that in the meantime, they reissued 2 pedals. I think it's the 2 Fender ones, the 57 and I think the 64 Tweed or something like that.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I remember those, yeah. Long time that they released those, right?
Yeah, they released those like a long time ago and they stopped making them. And then they re-released them because people were asking for a re-release. And I thought that's what they were sending me, but it was this guy. So when I saw Tumnus, I'm like, oh, that's an old product. Why are they sending this to me, right? I opened the box. I was like, ooh, it's a different Tumnus. So, and it is
a different one.
Yeah, it's different. So I did the comparison between the both of them. This one here seems to have way less gain and way less low end than the original Tumnus. And I'm not sure what they did, but they tweaked the circuit. So when you put them side by side, you know they're both going for the Klon thing, but this one here, it's different. And I think some people that don't like the Tumnus might prefer this one. And people that like the Tumnus might like to stack both of them because they stack like really, really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, well, germanium lets me think that they've used germanium diodes in this version while they used silicon diodes in the Tumnus, which does not necessarily explain the gain. So, if you look at some of the classic overdrive or boost circuits, gain is sometimes determined by something very simple. Like if you look at the OCD from Full Tone, for example, it's a very classic overdrive. Has been around for a long time. If you wanted to tweak or like modify the OCD to have more gain, the only thing you would actually need to do is change the gain potentiometer with the higher value, because the potentiometer is directly connected with the op amp that's necessary to create distortion or to create the overdrive. And if you use a higher value, let's say you double the value, obviously you'll get more gain out of it. Okay. So gain does not always have to do with like changing diodes, but the original Klon has germanium diodes as well. So it would be closer to the original in a sense, I would assume, where germanium diodes definitely start to clip a little bit earlier, which would also account why there's a little bit like less low end, but it might be a little bit more mid forward. Possible.
Yeah, it's I'm probably going to get to hear it more once I start to edit the video, because the way I splice up my videos, and I'm going to take the one with, let's say, the original Tumnus and the one with the new Tumnus, and I put them like one over top of the other, and then I start to cut them, and I go A, B throughout the whole thing. So as you're listening to one performance, you get to hear them within the same performance, like both pedals.
Okay.
And that's usually it's usually the thing that helps you hear the nuances between pedals, because sometimes if you play one and then there's like 2-second gap between the both of them, you just lost your reference point. So the way I do it is I stack both of them together so they're perfectly aligned. I make sure that they have the same volume. Then I splice them up, and as you're listening, you get to see the pedal change like this. If there's any difference, you're going to hear it. If there's no difference, you hear it because it's within the same playthrough. And that's usually where I can hear it, because when I just listen back to back, to me, they both pretty much sound the same. So that's why I kind of do these videos. It really does help hear any nuance or anything that's different. Sometimes I make videos and people say, I just don't hear the difference. To me, they sound exactly the same. And that's why I kind of do this. So yeah, I'm actually curious to see what Brian Wampler is going to do, because usually like he'll make a video and he usually makes the best video on this pedal, because you know, there's a bunch of us trying to, you know, make it look good, and then he comes out and goes, okay, this is what I did, this is what's different, and blah blah blah. Here, listen to the difference. You're like, why am I competing with him? he builds the damn pedals, you know. I can't make it sound as good as him. He knows what it's like. He built it, you know. But I still tried.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to compete against the person who can probably explain his pedal the best way possible. It's the same with me. I have to, every time I send a pedal out to someone to review it or to even to check it out, and then he explains it to other people, I'm always like, yeah, okay, but I know what I would have said. And it's an ongoing conflict. It's difficult sometimes to like let go. It's like, okay, I have my perception, you have your perception, and now you have to explain it how you see it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
it's
difficult.
It's kind of like handing over your favorite project to someone else, and you're letting that person introduce it to the world, and you're like, okay, you said this was wrong. It's kind of like when I did a demo and review of the Loveliner by 48ers guitar. I made a few mistakes about it, and Dirk, who owns the company, is like, oh man, you know, you said the body was mahogany. It's not mahogany. And you said this, like I made two mistakes, and he was kind of freaking out. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it happens. Like sometimes we goof up because we got like so much stuff to think about in the video, and we say the wrong things. I remember one pedal that I did a demo of. I was sure that the pedal was based on the Rat circuit, and apparently the pedal has nothing to do with the Rat, and it made me look like an idiot because I just assumed. So now what I do is I make sure to ask the builders, it's like, what is this based on? And when they're like, oh, it's a mythical pedal, I'm like, no. What is it based on? Well, it's a very popular British. No. What is it based on? Well, okay, the DNA is from this pedal. I'm like, okay, cool. Shoot straight with me so I don't look like an idiot.
But isn't it weird that people kind of try to avoid talking what their inspiration for a pedal was? I mean, I'm always super open about it. You asked me about the Gold member, for example. What is this? What is this based on? And I was super open. I said, hey, I was looking into different circuits. I was looking into the Klon. I was looking into the Blues Breaker. I was looking into the Tube Screamer and some of the Tube Screamer units that are out there. I was looking at them, and there are a lot of things that I liked, and there are a lot of things that I did not like. And what I simply did was I took everything that I liked, put it into this pedal, made it a dual overdrive, that is flexible enough to come up with a lot of different like tonal things. But I left everything out that I don't like, which was compression. I don't like compression. Or for this particular pedal, I didn't want all the compression. I wanted all the compression out. So, but I was open about what it's based on or what I was looking into for inspiration. But it seems like a lot of people, because there are so many clones out there and nobody wants to be affiliated or associated with doing a clone of something, that they're like, well, it's based on blah, blah, blah. Coming up with all kinds of funny descriptions for it. Just say, hey, my favorite overdrive or distortion pedal is the Rat. And, you know, I used that and I tweaked it, or, you know, I made it mine. It's like...
I'm gonna put an annex to this because it's something I've lived dealing with companies. So I remember this one time I get a pedal, I open it up, and I don't know what I'm looking at, but I think the layout looks really nice and neat. So I make a B-roll of this, right? So I make a video of this, and I put it in my video. And when the pedal builder in question sees the thing, is like, all right, your video is great, but you're going to do me a favor. I want you to take out that shot where we see the inside because I don't want anyone copying what I did. His pedal was an exact clone of another pedal that's really well known. I was like,
yeah,
okay. And this is like my early days. So I complied. I took it out. Nowadays, I would be like, I'm sorry, buddy, but I'm not doing that. Like, if you built it and there are screws and we can look inside, anybody can look inside, then it's part of the video. Just put goop on it like all the other people who don't want to get their, you know, their secret thing. It's like, come on. You know, how many circuits are out there?
Yeah. Or if you don't want people to see it at first glance, put put all the components on the opposite side, you know, towards where the potentiometers are, and then just write something funny on the back, you know, of the PCB, and then no one's going to see it. Yeah. But people, how do you think all these PCB kit and pedal kit makers? There are a lot of these guys around. There's like pedal PCB, there's guitar PCB, and also, how do you think they figured out how these units work? They bought, or they kind of got their hands on the unit, and then they opened it and they measured all the components. With it's a shit ton of work depending on the pedal. I mean, there are pedals out there who are so complicated. Sometimes I even made with 2 PCBs because otherwise they wouldn't work.
Yep.
And they kind of measured all this and then tried to put it together the best way possible. If they can do that, everybody can do it. Everybody who's interested in the topic. So, yeah, it's
and that is one thing that I really like about Wampler, is that Brian is never afraid to tell you the inspiration of the pedal. Like, he's gonna have like the bell, and he's gonna be like, it's a Nobles ODR1 with the mods I like to do to them, right? So when guys do that, I tend to really appreciate, because I know exactly, like, how many of us at one point have had like a pedal board, and without knowing it, we had 3 times the same circuit on the pedal board, like 3 variations on the Tube Screamer, and we didn't know they were Tube Screamers. And we're like, that's weird, because those pedals don't stack up too well. Of course, you have 3 Tube Screamers on your board, dude. Make a choice.
Yeah.
Unless you like that sound, but you know what I mean? It's like, once you know what you're buying, if you know what the circuit is based on, then you can make an informed decision. But a lot of beginners, and even sometimes intermediate players, they buy stuff and they don't know they have like the same circuit multiple times on the pedal board.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Pretty weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on with the news. Let me share my screen. I would like to show you something. Hold on a second. There we go. Where is it? Oh no, there we are. Ta-da! This came out, and I actually was also within the people who were chosen to make a video at launch date. So this came out Monday on the 4th, and I'm gonna link to the video as well. So that's a new Soldano amplifier, and it's the Astro 20. It's a 20-watt head. It's pretty compact, but it's not super light. I was kind of surprised when I opened it up before shooting the video. So I open it up, I take it out, I'm like, oh, this thing's actually quite heavy. Why is that? The thing is that they've put a very, very powerful output transformer in there. So even though you just have 20 watts of output power, it has a massive headroom, and it's getting extremely loud. And even though you could roll the volume full to like 10 or 11 or wherever you want to draw the line, it doesn't break up. If you want it to break up, you need either really, really powerful pickups or some kind of boost or overdrive in front of it. And then to keep things simple, so the clean channel has volume and just one tone knob, but has a bright switch, so you can have something. But it's enough. It sounds very balanced. It sounds very nice. Works with all kinds of guitars. And then it has 2 overdrive channels, which like share an EQ, but they have like different gain and volume controls. Like those are individual. And then what you have is each channel can work with 3 different like gain modes, although Soldano calls those galaxies. So you have like
that's what that
the
is.
Green galaxy, which is yeah, exactly. And it's actually going to change the color every time you change the channel or the galaxy, which is pretty fun. So the clean channel is actually like the green galaxy. Then you have the blue galaxy, which is sort of a well-rounded overdrive, like hard rock tone, and then you have the purple galaxy, which is like Soldano's classic high gain, in your face distortion sound. master and presence, and the 6 little dots, 6 little planets around that galaxy. Those are actually 6 different IR slots.
Oh wow!
So
okay,
you can save up to 6 IRs directly on the within that, and then you can use that thing without a cabinet.
Oh wow, that's smart.
The only thing you have to roll down the master completely to 0 in order to not have any damages to the power amp. But then you just use there's an XLR out on the back. Let me see if I can. Oh, there you go. So you have the USB output, which is connecting to the editor. The editor is super simple. It's like the most simple and easy to use editor there is. It's super easy to figure out. Have a headphone out. You have the balanced output, effects loop, like the typical things that you would expect. But the demo, as I said, I'm going to link to the review in the description of this video. It's all the stuff was done just with the IRs and using the direct out. And this thing
and it sounded great too.
Yeah, it's absolutely. If I've had the money that on the spot, I would take it with me. But right now, I have to save some cash. So
yeah,
but it's it's an amazing sounding amp. And the only I had like one point of critique, which is there are a lot of people I know who, if they have the possibility to go straight to the board, they do, but they also keep a certain stage volume. So they have a cabinet on stage, and they have they want the moving air from the back or from the side, but the front of house guy gets the signal from the balanced output. If you do that, and then you have to roll the master volume up, you might have to find a different setup for your volumes and gains on each channel in order to make it work, which is like, let's say you found the setting that you really like, and then you go into that situation where you run kind of hybrid, and then you adjust the master and things don't work out. That could be a little bit tricky, but it's minor stuff. I mean, people who know how this stuff works, really, they can figure it out. But yeah, so that's a great thing. The price, 2,300 euros. By the way, in the morning when I was checking this, it was still available, and now so apparently at least Thomann, they sold the ones that they had.
That's crazy.
So they're going away fast. But yeah, 2,300. I mean, for all the feature set that you get, I think it's pretty fair, to be honest. You might have people that are going to say, well, the price is too high, but there are people that are going to tell you, hey, this pedal costs 250 euros, is too expensive. So
no, for sure.
Whatever.
And do you know what it's based on?
Well, there was an amplifier from Soldano called the Astro Verb, and it shares a little bit of that DNA because obviously it's a like small form factor amplifier. The Astro Verb also had 20 watts, but this thing obviously brings together has a high headroom clean channel, which not all Soldanos have, and then the rest is based on what Soldano is pretty much known for, like hard rock, high gain rock, and even metal tones. You can set up the low end response in a way that it also serves like lower tuned guitars and go really high on the gain. You still have like a tight signal. So this thing is pretty versatile for being such a compact sport. It's comes in around at 11.8 kilos, almost 12 kilos. And did I mention it's completely MIDI switchable? So the foot switch input is actually MIDI, so 7-pin MIDI, so you can get phantom power for your MIDI controller if it supports it. You don't need an additional power supply, and you can switch between 128 saved presets, where you can have like the channel, you can have a different IR. So that's
crazy.
It's a big feature set. Pretty nice.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw your video this morning, because like the I didn't know the price point, but when I saw the pedal and not the pedal but the amp, and I heard the tones, I was like, man, I don't know what microphone he's using, but that sounds absolutely crushing. And then you tell me you're just using the built-in IRs. Like, wow, they really nailed that one.
Yeah. So the whole IR thing and the editor, the company that's involved is Synergy. The company also makes the modules. Yeah. And since this is all like one big company, it's like all boutique amp distribution, where it's Soldano, it's Friedman, it's Wampler as well. Wampler is also part of it's Morgan. It's all these companies. So obviously the research and design department is shared. And actually, when I checked the editor, I was like, oh, this looks very much like the Friedman IRX editor. And it's the same company making it. So they kept it in kind of the same format.
That explains
which was pretty nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. So yeah, I recommend checking out the videos and all the other videos for that matter, because there should be a lot of them out right now.
Yeah.
Moving on, since we talked about like going direct, like ditching amps and going direct with a kind of pedal board only approach, a couple of days ago, Boss kind of went into that same sort of thing when they released the IR2. So like the compact Boss version of like an impulse response loader.
Okay.
Where, yeah, so this is going to continue. This is going to continue. There's no way around it. This thing comes with, so it's like a compact version of the IR200. Comes with 11 amp emulations. Comes with a 3-way EQ and some ambience, level, and gain on the top half. But yeah, has all the stuff. Has clean, has a twin, tweed, diamond, crunch, Brit, high gain. So, essentially everything you need, and you put a couple of pedals on your board, you add that, and you go straight to the board, and now you're good to go.
That's cool. And is there an effects loop on this pedal?
Yeah, I'm trying to find that out. So here's the Anderton's video, like a screenshot of it. So there's an input, there's a channel select, 2 outputs, and then you have a foot switch input. And Cybers, no, does not have an effects loop. It has a USB-C port. Oh, it has a USB-C port and lets you record directly to your DAW. Wow.
That's cool.
Interesting. That's really interesting. It also has a headphone output.
Trying to see from the thumbnail from Anderton's if there's, because it looks like there's 3 jacks on the left side.
Yeah, that's 2 outputs. So it's 2 outputs. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I'm wondering, like, because if they put a...
Oh, there is a send and return. I'm sorry, there is a send and return. Interesting.
Oh, well, then if they did that, they really thought of everything in a pedal, like a Boss traditional size. It's like, wow, that's crazy. Because we were talking about this last week. We were talking about an article of someone saying that they were reducing their rig. And then when you see that, it's like, man, you got a lot of amps, choice pedals that go along with it. You could have like a mini board and show up to a gig with that. That's crazy.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, interesting. I just wanted to bring that up because, yeah, obviously, it's interesting that we just talked about this last week, and these products just keep coming up, and more people like getting into the boat. Then, since we talked about the Nauticlon last week as well, so Catalin Bread came up with their version of the Nauticlon. The difference is you actually have to solder some stuff. So it's essentially like a DIY kit of one of their pedals.
Okay.
But since we kind of went into the whole topic and what kind of opportunities the idea or the concept brings for others, now we see people are moving, like people start to move into that direction to make it easier for people to like build their own pedal at a cheaper price, because this comes in at $85.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah. So you can toss in another 50 and have them build it for you. But where's the fun in that? Yeah, exactly. Just build it yourself. As I said, the only difference is you have to solder some stuff together. It's not completely solder free. Would be easier if you just have to if you have to solder 2 or 3 things, I think most people can do that, or some people might know someone who can help them with that. But yeah, more of that stuff is going to come up. And then you sent me something that I found interesting, because it was like kind of the same thing going on with 2 different, very influential classic artists.
Yeah.
So Alex Lifeson just launched a new family of amps with Mojotone. I've heard of Mojotone, but they weren't on my radar like, super present. So, and I know that Alex Lifeson played using Ketna amps before. They actually made a signature amp for him. But now he has his own little lineup of lurxed amplifiers. What do you make of this?
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking like it's really going to depend who this caters to. From what I read about it, it seems to be like more high-end boutique stuff. If you're a big fan of Rush, big fan of Alex and his tone, I think this is going to be a no-brainer. But for everybody else, this might be one of those things like, yeah, maybe if I try one and I like it, I might buy it. But I don't see like the average consumer like forking out thousands of dollars for amps like those, because usually this is just my opinion, but I think you have to be first off like a fan of these musicians to really want to like partake into purchasing something like this. It's kind of like when Slash comes out with a new Les Paul, right? It's thousands of dollars. It's going to be a limited run. It's not for everybody, but the people that are really fan of him and his guitars, they're going to jump on it and they're going to be sold out. And those that are like you and I, are, not financially super rich and can have all this disposable income, we look at it and we go, how the hell are these people affording this? Are they all dentists and lawyers? Like, what's going on?
A lot of them actually are. So, but if I look at the price point, so there's going to be like a hand-wired limited edition. That's obviously going to, as the article says, it's going to retail for $3,500. But the standard edition is priced at $2,500. So it's not that heavy. And I'm going to tell you why I think it's not that heavy. There's also a tube amp, a combo amp priced at $2,000, and then a like kind of 30-watt version of it priced at $1,700. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
What I have to say is I think I saw I think this huge 4x12 looks killer. It's not the typical 4x12 kind of Marshall-y format. This is more like one of the tall ones. Yeah. And I think it sounds killer. I think I saw an even better picture of that. Let me find it. Okay, lyrics. There we go. There it is. Ah, God. Yeah, modeled after producer Nick Raskulinec, whatever that's pronounced. So it's a 2069 4x12 Marshall. I think this looks killer.
Yeah.
It's very tall. So I like that. I give him credit for that, like choosing that format, because you could easily fit 6 12-inch speakers in there if you wanted to. But instead, it's 4 and you have like more. So there we go. And the other thing, so the other person, like a few days prior to that, Jimmy Page announced that he has teamed up with SunDragon, another amp company I haven't heard of, but I might be the ignorant one here.
No, I haven't heard of them either. So,
and so they have a recreation of Jimmy Page's amplifier used for touring and recording from 1969 on the Led Zeppelin 2 album and those that followed, the SunDragon, which apparently is based on a super bass Marshall, like one of the late 60s super bass Marshall. And it has all kinds of fairy dust in it because it has, what does it have? It's like new old stock GE 6550 tubes and Allen Bradley resistors and Philips mustard capacitor, like it has all the fairy dust. So there's all the thing. Here's the difference though. While Alex Lifeson wants people to actually buy this thing and be able to afford it somehow, apparently Jimmy Page doesn't, because where did I see the price? This thing comes in at a super high price. Why can't I see the price here? Damn it. I think this one was like really, really expensive. Let's find out. There we go. I mean, it looks like a Marshall. Sorry.
Looks like a Marshall.
Looks like a Marshall. Yeah. Where's the price on that thing? Mitch Colby. Oh, I know this guy. This guy used to work at DV Mark. For some time. Yeah. So he's the founder of. Interesting. Where's the limited edition? Let's see.
Limited edition. You got to fish for the price,
that's the
man.
combo.
Probably shop there on top. Yeah.
Shop. Let's see. Okay, so the limit. Wow, $12,500 for the limited edition SunDragon. But that's the combo. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, but that's American.
Standard.
That's American. I'm fine in Canadian dollars. That's nothing.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's
if you don't
interesting
get the joke,
though.
just go look at the Canadian dollar and the value.
Yeah, I know. I've seen some of that recently.
Yeah.
To me, the question remains like, why? I don't get it. I mean, yeah, you said, because I would assume that someone like Jimmy Page doesn't need the extra money to pay for his gas and electricity bill. I would assume.
It's a tough question because at this price point, it's obviously not going to be like, let's say you take a 16-year-old kid who's into like classic rock and that kid wants to buy like a Les Paul Jr. or a Telecaster or whatever. And they're like, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Page. I want the same sound. Oh, look, a new amp. That kid's not buying that amp. I'm not buying that amp. There's no way. I mean, that's buying a used car. Like,
yeah, exactly.
For me, that makes no sense. But of course, like guitar collectors, if they're into building like a really nice niche and rare collection of amplifiers, yeah, those people are going to go for that. People with, a lot of disposable income are going to go for that. But the average musician, there's no way we can afford this. Like, you can't say,
no.
Look, honey, I want to buy a new amp. It's $12K. I'm going to pony it up and, I'll make up for it. Yeah, that's not going to happen.
So here it says that the standard edition is going to be available for like $3,800, and for an extra $1,000 if you want the NOS. For an extra $1,000 if you want the NOS tubes. Are you kidding me? Christ's sake, man. Oh God, yeah. Well,
yeah.
It is what it is. I mean, that stuff is never going to stop, will it?
Well, we're both kind of biting our tongue and not saying what we think here, but I know. I know. But stuff like that. I know there's a market for it, but logically, if you want to sell, like if you want to sell volume, you don't sell $12,000 amps. No. Like you were saying earlier, like I kind of made a bitter face when you said, you know, Alec Lifeson has got like a $3,000 amp. And I was like, but in reality, it's not that expensive because you have like Mesa Boogie that's in those price ranges. You have Sir amplifiers. And I mean, there are a lot of boutique, great sounding, reliable amps in that price range. For me, it's more like it's a new company. Is it sustainable? Are they still going to be around in 10 years? That's usually my thinking for a $3,000 amp, but $12,000? I mean, to me, that's kind of like, oh, cool. We're going to talk about it for a few days, and once the novelty of it wears off, no one's going to say like, oh, I bought 2 of them, so I have a backup. No.
No, not at all. Not at all. And and that's why I said the last time, that's why I love Soldano so much, because they make all of these like classic amps available, and they're like truthfully recreated for a super great price. For a super great price where you pay, obviously, labor in Malaysia might be more affordable than, you know, in the US and so on and so forth, and in Europe. And labor is a big part of like building these amps. Totally fine with me. But, you know, they found a way to make it happen. And they're also pretty careful about like finding the parts and about the whole design thing. That, that's why they sound so close to the originals. So there are ways to make these classic amp circuits available to people in a way where you don't have to, you know, get a loan to buy an amplifier. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Completely agree with you. Well, that's the news. That's the news for this week. And I would like to, kind of start with our main topic of today. What is it about Vox amps? And every time I kind of that question like circled around in my head, my 2 heads. I heard like Jerry Seinfeld asking it, you know, with this kind of like voice going off, like, what's going on with all the Vox amps? Why is everybody talking about Vox amps? About those amps. Exactly. So let me give you my opening statement on Vox amps, because we've talked about this beforehand, and we are on the spectrum. We are on 2 opposite ways, because every time in my life I tried a Vox amp, I played around with it, I liked it, but I never felt really at home. Not that I did with other amps. If I was forced to play with a Vox AC30 during a gig, I could do so, but I wouldn't be like 100% happy. I would be happier with a deluxe reverb, or with or maybe a Plexi Marshall. Somehow that's more my cheese than the Vox amp is. And although all of that is my reality with Vox amps, and I've had experiences with Vox amps on different levels, I acknowledge that those amps have created, in combination with the corresponding artist, obviously, have created some of the most iconic tones in the history of guitar tones. I mean, we just have to look at people like Brian May, or who else? The Shadows. The Shadows played Vox amps, up to when I saw the Foo Fighters in a very small venue. That's a long time ago. I was one of 500 people in that venue that saw the Foo Fighters. Two years later, they sold out Wembley. And Dave Grohl was playing a Vox AC30 blended with a dual rectifier, an early 2-channel dual rectifier. And that sound was crushing. That was the first time I was like, okay, there is something about Vox Amps, because in a way they sound very musical. They sound very pleasing to a band context. So that's my opening statement. That's where I am on the spectrum. Where are you?
That's a very fair assessment, because I'm going to share with you kind of my experience. So
please.
The YouTube channel that I have mainly started with Vox content, just because of the fact that a lot of people misunderstand these amps. We have to acknowledge that for some players, these amps are not going to be for them, right? Tonally speaking, the interaction they have with them, it's not going to be their thing. And that, to me, is fair enough. You know, if you buy an amp, you watch videos on YouTube, people tell you what to do, you try it, you go, nah, this is not my gig. That is fine. But sometimes I manage to give enough information to people about, you know, something like the AC50 behind me, or an AC4, the AC15, AC10. And then they go, wait a minute. Okay, so these amps don't necessarily react the same way as something like a Fender or a Marshall. Because a Marshall, I mean, even a Marshall can be really tough to dial in. Like if you're using, like, let's say a JCM 800 at home, and you're like, I want to sound like one of my favorite artists, forget about it. At bedroom level, these amps do not perform. And a Vox kind of does the same thing too.
Yeah.
Now, my stance on it is that I've played for most of my life Fender style amps, and they don't sound very good with my playing for whatever reason. So I had a 65 Super Reverb. I had a Tremolux. I had an old Vibrolux. I mean, I had a bunch of amps. And all of them from like early 60s to mid 60s, some CBS stuff. And my dad loved those amps, but for me, I just sounded like completely like bad through those amps. So I went with PV 5150s in my 20s, Angle. I tried Mesa, and those, like, Mesa Boogie is the closest thing that I've found where I was comfortable. And a lot of people were saying, oh, Mesas, they're crap, I don't like them. So I end up being one of the weirdos who really likes those type of amps that are not super popular for whatever reason. But like the F30, the F50 series from Mesa. Oh yeah, I freaking love those amps. They sound awesome. Very underrated. And eventually, I think I would say around like 2004, 2005, I heard Brad Paisley for the first time, and I was like, what the hell is he playing through? It sounds killer. So then I started doing some research, and I found out that he was playing a Telecaster through, I think it was like a mid-60s AC30. I was like, okay. And then I got to discover more about the AC30, and I wanted an AC30. But those are big amps. They're loud, they're heavy, and for home use, maybe not the best thing. But the moment I grabbed a Telecaster, plugged into a Vox amplifier, I was like, that's it. That's the sound that inspires me. I like what I hear. So I think it really starts with using the right guitar with those amps. Like if you go with a Strat, I like the sound of a Strat through a Vox, but some people will much prefer the sound of a Strat through a Fender. But then you use a Telecaster through a Vox, things open up. You use a Gretsch through a Vox, things open up. So it seems like a guitar that doesn't have a whole lot of output sounds really great through these amps. But as soon as you get with humbuckers, it tends to sound a bit muddy. So if you're more of a rock player and you go through these amps, some people can pull it off and some people like that sound, but I find most people that love the Vox, per the question, what is it about Vox? They usually attract people that love low output humbuckers or single coils. Those are like the guitars you see the most used with these types of amps. And I think that you also have to be someone that is not into like big, lush, full sounding amplifiers, because they're pretty narrow bandwidth when you think about it. They barely have any low end. They don't have much in the way of low mids, and everything is upper mids and high frequencies with these amps, which explains like the chime part of a Vox. So if you're playing that at home, you go, it sounds filtered, you might not be into it, but then you crank it up, you put it in a band context, and you go, oh, wait a minute. Now I've got this little niche carved out for me by this amp. It sounds mix ready, and it's perfect for live or even the studio, but on its own, that's where I think a lot of people have a hard time. They want it to sound fuller, kind of like a nice cranked Marshall or a good Fender clean tone. So that's kind of like the simplest way I can describe what it is about a Vox amplifier.
Okay. The thing you explained about the low end comes in at a surprise for me, because we know that guys like Brian May used a treble booster to actually bring the amp into, like the next possible kind of distortion range. But then again, you say they don't have a lot of low end. I assume if I was to use a full range boost on a Vox AC30, things would become very muddy very soon.
Well, I think that's where we have to make a distinction between old Vox amplifiers and the new Vox amplifiers. So the old Vox were meant to be like clean headroom type of amps. They were loud, but they did not distort so well. And the treble booster was invented because if you took an AC30 and you cranked it up, it got muddy very, very quickly.
Okay.
So by using the treble booster, you're getting rid of some of the low end and you were boosting up the top end. Okay. Now, if you use today's like Vox made by Korg and you use a treble booster, you might not like the tone as much as what Rory Gallagher was getting or Brian May. Those guys had much darker sounding amps.
Okay.
Today's Vox has a treble bleed on the tone cap there. So as you, not the tone cap, but the volume. So as you crank it up, the treble starts to bleed off. But at bedroom level, it's a bright sounding amp. Yeah. So if you think of those amps and then you use a treble booster with them, it's a bit hard.
Okay. So that has to do with the fact that I'm appreciating that I'm going to learn something on the run here. It essentially has to do with the way these amps were built in the past. Why don't we jump into, I've kind of went into a little bit of history and created some kind of timeline so that people who are not aware of like when and how Vox amps started are like on the same information level. So essentially Vox amp was founded in 1957 by Thomas Walter Jennings. But his first product, which was actually not an amp, was actually an electronic keyboard, wasn't an amp. So that's what his first thing was. But the whole thing didn't start there. It actually started a little bit earlier when a friend of, let's not say a friend, what I found was a World War II workmate of him called Dick Denny. He showed him a prototype guitar amp, which would then later become the Vox AC15. And, World War II workmate sounds more like they were like on the engineering side of things and not so much like running around with a rifle shooting Nazis, So 1957, Vox amp was founded. They released the AC15 as kind of the first product. And then at the end of the 50s, they also released a student model called the AC10, which later has been reintroduced. It also had a built-in tremolo effect, although they kind of mislabeled it with vibrato, interestingly. That one was then discontinued in the mid-60s. We are going to find out why in a little bit. So in that same year, 1959, they already were in competition with Fender, but Fender had one advantage back then. They had the Twin. Twin was way more powerful, had more headroom. So we mentioned the Shadows before. The Shadows came in. They were using Vox exclusively, and they said, we want an amp that has more headroom. It needs to be louder. So essentially what they did, they doubled the AC15 and then kind of created the legendary AC30, like with 2 speakers and twice the power. And I mean, yeah, then throughout the 60s, it was made absolutely popular by the Beatles, the Stones, the Kings, the Yardbirds. And I mean, we know about all these players that until today are like known for using the amps. We mentioned Brian May, we have The Edge, Paul Weller, Rory Gallagher, Mark Knopfler, Hank Marvin, Tom Petty. So the list goes on and on and on. It's like so many people who use the amp.
Yep.
And then in the 60s, the Beatles started to use the amps exclusively as well. And when they started touring, they were like, okay, that's nice, but we need more power. It's just not loud enough. I mean, we know about the old videos of the Beatles, and they couldn't hear their own sound because everybody was like screaming so much. And
that's right.
You know, PA systems weren't really a thing back then. So they came out with the AC50, which you recently found one, and I know you love it very much. They came out with the AC100, like doubled that even more, which had a 2x15 cab. And then they also made the first sort of hybrid solid state amp called the T60, which wasn't very popular because it tended to overheat. And there we run into something that I am very familiar with when it comes to Vox amps. I always found that whenever I was playing through a Vox and I had it even at half the volume, this amp would get so friggin' hot. Unbelievable. I thought, like, if I put a pan there, I could boil some eggs instantly if I wanted to. It was so hot. And it seems like that was something that until this day, it's inherent. So these amps still tend to get very, very hot because the power amp has been run at extreme voltage to achieve the sound. But also, it got them into a bad reputation in the 60s, where people were like, you know, the amp's overheating or it was malfunctioning. And then, so in the mid-60s, Jennings started a relationship with the Thomas Organ Company in the US. They started to import Vox. And that's where the focus shifted towards transistors. And since that was a big thing, but it also required a lot of investment, Jennings sold his controlling interest of JMI to a British holding company called the Royston Group. He remained a CEO, but he lost all the controlling interest. And then at the end of the 60s, Royston filed for bankruptcy. And that's when something that you mentioned at the end of the last episode, like the ownership of Vox changed during the 70s, like so much.
Yeah.
There was a British bank being an owner. There was Dallas Arbiter, who was one of the owners. The AC30 was continued, but the costs were cut here and there. They started to use PCBs. They started to use solid state rectifiers. They started to use cheaper cabinet material, all that stuff, which kind of confirms my experience with Vox amps. When I started out working in retail, we had a workshop upstairs with a guy who was like, he knew every amplifier inside out. This guy was a genius. An older guy, smoking his pipe, super chilled, relaxed dude. And then he would get in an occasional Fender Twin or something for a modification or for a speaker swap or whatever. But the amplifier that they brought him the most was the Vox AC30 because something was malfunctioning, something was wrong. It was like, he had so many of them, and he said, if you put 20 Vox amps from 1960 to 1980, they're all going to sound they're all going to sound different, and B, they're all going to have different issues.
For sure. Yep. Well, one thing I can say is that I remember reading about Matchless.
Yeah.
And Matchless was started because a lot of musicians back in the 1990s were playing the old Vox Amps because they could buy them. They were still pretty affordable.
Yeah.
But they would go on tour and the amps would start to fail on them. So they would come into the shop. They would bring their amps. Can you fix it? I'm on tour. I really need this amplifier. It's the only one I have. So these guys started to analyze the circuit and they noticed what made it sound great, but they noticed what didn't make sense about these amps and why they were so unreliable. So they started to make their own versions, if you will, of those coveted amps, but they made them like 1,000 times more reliable. And some would even argue that some of the Matchless stuff sounds as good as the vintage amps, maybe even better. So, and then we have kind of a branch off of Matchless with Bad Cat, which also kind of kept that lineage. So you have some boutique options that are more reliable than the vintage stuff, sound just as great, if not better, depending on the person. So yeah, there were some flaws, but we have to keep in mind that they were still a small company and they were trying to reach the American audience. So that's where Thomas Organ comes in. And Thomas Organ really, I'm going to say it, they really shat the bed on this one because they were making their own amps and they were making a lot of solid state amps. They were making this whole line of amps like the Berkeley and, they had all these British sounding names for the amps. But those amps weren't made by Vox in the UK. They were made by Thomas Organ in the United States. And they were like really cheap knockoff. And they even had like pictures of the Beatles in association with amps they never played. So the original Vox company got screwed over by Thomas Organ in a sense. And you mentioned Royce. How are they called? Royston?
The Royston Group was yeah, exactly.
That is another company that actually was the downfall of Vox because these guys, they were working on the black box. Okay, so there were many companies working on the black box for aviation, and these guys were sure that they were going to get the government contract. So they were buying all these small companies just to have different assets. And they didn't get the contract.
Yeah.
And when that happened, everything failed for them. They filed for bankruptcy. And part of that bankruptcy was Vox.
Yeah.
So Vox got shafted once again. So it happened on multiple fronts. And I think it was because it was a brand new industry. Because when you think about it, 1950s to 60s, that's not a very long time for guitar to bloom and become this new thing, right? Because before that, it was organs and accordions.
Yeah.
Those were like the big instrument. And the accordion, I mean, you can watch YouTube videos like old reels. Man, the accordion was the big deal.
Yeah.
It's like everyone was playing it and you'd have a party, your friends would come over. And I mean, today, accordion, you'd get kicked out of a house. no one wants to hear you play accordion.
Don't say anything. My mom actually plays in an accordion orchestra. So
really?
Imagine you have an orchestra, but everything is replaced by different types of accordions. Like for the high ones, for the low ones, like for the double basses, you have like these super low bass accordions and everything. Everything is replaced with accordions, and it's actually super interesting and actually entertaining to watch. I know what you're talking about. I 100% agree that sometimes if you see a guy with an accordion and he plays something, and also in order to be able to really impress people, you need to play it well. And it's difficult to play this thing. It's super difficult.
When I think accordion, I think Weird Al Yankovic. Like my Sharona, and it's like, come on,
Yeah. Or like
another one rides the bus.
Polka on 45, where he goes like, hey Jude, don't make it bad. Terrible.
Yeah, so that's when I'm thinking accordion, that's what I'm thinking of. It's like the weird frizzy haired guy with the glasses coming in and just playing like weird polka songs. Yeah, everyone's like, dude, I'm into hip hop. What the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So I apologize to your mom. It wasn't a jab.
No
at
worries.
Her.
No. It's all good. Every time I need to explain what an accordion orchestra is every time, because everybody's like, what is an accordion orchestra? I mean, this is essentially an orchestral instrument on itself because you have so many voices in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then people come together and the group of 50 people, and then they play like all the classics, like what classical music does.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, Royston filed for bankruptcy, and then the Vox brand changes ownership a couple of times. And
multiple times in the 60s.
In the 60s and then in the 70s. And then at the end of the 70s, a UK distributor called Rose Morris bought Vox. They just had lost their distribution deal with Marshall. And they wanted to kind of reanimate the brand again and some of the like classic amps, and they wanted to bring back the tube rectifier and Alnico speakers and all these things. And they tried for a good amount of time, but they never really made it. You know, they never really brought brought Vox Amps back to the next level, or to where they belong. You know, up in the ranks with Marshall and Fender and all these things. So then, 14 years pass, and suddenly Korg buys the majority in Rose Morris, which means they essentially bought the Vox product line. And obviously with Korg in the bag, there's this, it's a huge company, it's a huge operation, and there's also a lot of capital involved. So they're like, okay, nice, great job, Rose Morris, but we can do that better. We can actually go where you want to go. And they bring all the old like values and features back. Same as Rose Morris, like tube rectifier is back. Alnico speakers, they have a more high-end chassis for the amps. And since the early 90s, Korg is the owner of Vox Amps. However, if we look at what happened since the 2000s, because essentially, so they're like, hey, we are here, we're bringing back all the nice things. At some point, they came out with the C2 and C1 versions of the amp, so the AC30 C2 and the AC50 C1. And they went back to solid-state rectifiers, and they went back to somewhat cheaper materials for the chassis and kind of cutting costs here and there. And at the same time, they kind of break this whole thing out, and they bring hand-wired versions of the AC15, which have like the classic turret board construction, no PCB, and they have the tube rectifier and yada yada yada. So essentially, they're kind of breaking out into two different lines. One is like hand-wired, and some of these were actually limited edition with limited edition Tolegs and whatnot. So they kind of break this out into, here's what all the great things about the early Vox amps, and here's like the more affordable version. Which kind of strikes me as like, you know, you have an iconic design here. Why don't you just stick with this?
There's something I want to bring back, because I think that's a great point you just made about like the difference between the hand-wired and like the mass-produced, made in China stuff. So if we go back to Rose Morris, those are actually really good amps. They sound killer. Okay. But they don't fetch the same prices as, let's say, the 60s stuff. Okay. If you're talking like, let's say, 70s, AC30s, a lot of people like poo-poo those amps. But the truth is that if you look at any rig rundown with Brian May, that's what he's using. He's using those early, like I think like 70 to 72 AC30s. Okay. He's got some 60s stuff, but I don't think he still brings those out on the road. He has his own signature stuff. So like some of the stuff from the 70s is still fairly good, and you can still get at a reasonable price. The Rose Morris stuff, I think the timing was bad, because the 1980s, you got to think like Soldano, Marshall, all like the 88 preamp, like everything was high gain, and everyone was trying to push everything like as loud and as distorted as they could. And here you have Rose Morris going, hey, let's bring back this amp from the 1960s. And look at the amp, look at the grill cloth, look at the logo. You don't associate this with heavy metal, right? No. So I think that was part of the timing for Rose Morris. And the amps, they sound good. You can get them fixed because they're well built.
Okay.
But, they kind of, I think the timing was off for them.
Okay.
The story that I find really cool also with Korg. Now, don't quote me on this. I don't remember if I'm getting like the real picture here or if I'm just kind of making some stuff up, but I'm pretty certain that I remember reading an article where Korg had bought like a bunch of companies, right? All these companies were failing. They bought a bunch of them. And the CEO's son was going through the papers looking at what they had bought and noticed that they had bought Vox.
Oh.
And he went to his father and he said, look, I'm a big fan of this company and we own them. Can we revive this? And that essentially this kind of became his project where they revived Vox. But they revived it in the 90s where you had bands like Oasis coming back up. You had Blur. You had all like this British pop sensation going on in the 90s. And you had in the Seattle scene guys using stuff they found at like pawn shops, right? So the Vox had a resurgence because like all the hair metal was going out. And now all this pop, like all the guys were cutting their hair and they were wearing ripped jeans and stuff like this. And it was cool to play like guitars that were completely banged up with like really cheap pedals.
Right.
Nowadays, like all of that gear sells for thousands of dollars. And back then it was like disposable stuff, right? And when they brought it back, there was the TBX. I believe that's what it is. The AC30... whatever 6/30 TBX or whatever. Apparently those amps are freaking fantastic. I haven't played them, but I've seen them for sale. They can go easily for like 2,500 used, which is a little more affordable than let's say a 1960s version of the amp.
Those were the Tony Bruno ones, right?
No, the Tony Bruno, I think those were early, if I remember correctly, those were because there's a series of amp with Tony Bruno. They are AC30s, but they're modded to his thing. Okay. And they're part of that lineage of Vox where they were trying different stuff and it just didn't catch on, like the Night Train, which has like a cult following. Yeah. But never caught on as much as the AC15 and the AC30. So there was early runs of the AC30 in the early 2000s as well. I don't remember what the model was, but it was all hand wired and it was almost like the closest thing you can have to a 60s Vox AC30. Okay. And then they came out with the hand wired series, which is still sold today and fairly popular. They're hand wired, but in China. And they have like the white Tolex and all that. They're gorgeous amplifiers. I've never played one, but apparently they're really good, easy to fix. Super reliable. So, I mean, they're still trying. They had different variations on the AC15. Some of them came with Wharfdale speakers. Some of them came with like lower brand Celestion, like the VX10s and all that. And eventually they settled back on putting the speakers that people wanted. The Alnico Blue and the Celestion Greenback. There's one model that comes with a WGS, but I can't remember which one it is. It's from a few years ago. There's also a version of the AC30 with one single 12-inch speaker in there. I think it's called the S1. Yeah. I own that one. It's a pretty good amplifier. Loud as hell, though. Not for home use. No. So, Vox has tried to innovate, but it seems every time they innovate, people just don't want it. They just want like the classic stuff from them. So I think they're kind of like in a weird position. So they can innovate with like the smaller MV50 series. Like they recently put out one a few months back, the Brian May model. It's got a treble booster in there and all this. I have the intention to eventually get my hands on one so that they can innovate with. But when it comes to the classics, people are like, man, just give me what the old stuff was. I don't want the new version that you have or new vision of this product. Yeah, that's the. So I think, the reason I'm mentioning this is I'm going to explain what I mean. So they kind of, as I said, they kind of break out. They have like the C1 and the C2 versions.
They kind of balance it with the head-wired versions. They also released a couple of the AC4, for example, in 2 versions, like standard and head-wired. So you also have something, for the guys who like an amp that doesn't have that much power. So the AC4, I've seen people play with an AC4 in small pubs. It sounds amazing little amp. They reintroduced the AC10 as the AC10C1, I believe. But then, and here comes my point, they also branched out into, like, using the Vox brand and branched out into a couple of things. And I remember very well because, so in the beginning of the 2000s, they also introduced some digital modeling amps, the Valvetronic series. Do you remember those?
I remember those.
I remember those very well because I had one. I had because I needed I was comparing practice amps for home, and I wanted something where I have like lots of different sounds. So I said, okay, let's try line 6 and try this and this. And so I ended up with the Valvetronics, the VT15, I believe it was. Because, so those actually had a preamp tube in them. And they somehow sounded a little bit warmer, a little bit more direct, at least when I was doing a comparison. And, but they then recreated the sounds of like Fender amps and Marshalls and obviously the classic Vox amps and US high gain amps and all of that stuff. And apparently they were successful enough with it because those amps were produced up until, I think, 2018, 2019. They came up with the Valvetronics XL, with the VT, the VT Plus. It's obvious that for that domain, they didn't want to lose the competition to Line 6 and some of the other companies that came out. I mean, Marshall was in the modeling game as well. Everybody was or still is in the modeling game until we had this complete like breakaway of guys like Fractal and whatnot, who's like, you don't need an amp. If you have modeling, we have all that technology. You can go straight to the board and, spare carrying that stuff around with you. And why would you want a modeling amp and have a speaker attached to it while the speaker changes with every model, essentially? Marshall is going to have a different speaker in it. So my point is, if you want to, as you said, like kind of revive the brand and all the great aspects of Vox, why would you use the Vox name to, I mean, I know why you would. There's marketing around it, and it sounds better if it's a Vox amp than if you call it a Korg amp, obviously. But, why would you, and then you have the Night Train, which is a complete different thing and has nothing to do with the Vox amp, really. Why would you branch out into all these different things and make Vox multi-effects pedals and all that? Kind of seems unnecessary.
I really can't speak to their intention, but I can tell you what I'm seeing that they're doing. If you look at Korg, like not Vox, but you look at Korg, they have like a keyboard like the Korg Triton, right? Fucking phenomenal synth. It's more of a forward-thinking digital platform, pretty much gear for every musician you can think of.
Yeah.
But then when they were looking at Vox, they want to integrate, or at least this is what I'm thinking. I think that they want to integrate this innovation into the brand, but the brand is that, right? The old stuff, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, all the bands that used to play with those. And the musicians that are still supporting the company, that's what they're expecting from them. And if they're trying to move forward and adapt to like the new demographic, they have to be able to compete with other people. So we had the tube shortage for a while there, and they were thinking, here we have this thing that you usually find in microwaves and fridges and stuff like that, but we can convert this into a tube, so we call it the new tube.
Yeah.
I tried it, didn't care for it. To me, didn't, like, maybe electronically speaking, it does the same thing as a tube, but sonically speaking, didn't cut it for me. They tried to integrate it into the Tube Screamer. I think there's a Tube Screamer with the new tube technology in there.
whatever.
Yeah. So, and then they have a series of pedals that are kind of like amp in a box. One of them does the Vox thing, the other Marshall and all that.
Yeah.
I haven't tried those, but I watched the demos, and they were really like pushing for those pedals to become successful, and they didn't.
No.
The marketing around it maybe flopped or something. I'm not sure what happened. So it's kind of like the point I made earlier. It seems like the audience wants something very specific from Vox, but Vox is going, no. They're not listening. They're just kind of doing their own thing. They have their own vision. I can't tell you how many people have written to me over the years saying, why doesn't Vox make an AC-15 with an effects loop? I don't know. I don't know how many people have requested it. Why don't they make a Vox with, the option to go down to 7 watts or, 0.1 watts or whatever?
Yeah.
Why don't we have like this power scaling? I don't know why they don't do it. They're not listening to the people. How many people are saying, man, I wish Vox was making old bass amps again, but they make like this very small, like mini Super Beetle that uses the new tube technology. But people are saying, man, I got the money. I want to buy like the real thing. I want the 100-watt beast, like the AC 100 or the 80 100. And they're not listening. No. So I think at some point, Vox should really listen to what people want and make a choice between what the consumers want to purchase and what they are thinking that the consumers want to purchase. I think there's a big gap there between both of them.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I mean, first of all, regarding the sort of reliability on like how reliable these amps are. I mentioned the store that I used to work in and the workshop and how many Vox AC30s they brought in. I would say 2 to 3 times a month somebody would come with some kind of Vox amp. And then also I went on a dealer visit once while I was working for Positive Grid, and I went to Stockholm and I met the guy who was the guitar tech for the band called Roxette. Remember Roxette?
Yeah.
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 And while a lot of people might not really, kind of think about guitar music when they listen to Roxette, because it kind of was very pop-oriented music, but there was a good amount of guitar in there, and the guitar player was a huge fan and user of the Vox AC30, and he just used it with pedals. So he usually had 2 of them on stage and then used it with pedals. And at some point, he got so frustrated with his Vox amps, like always breaking during shows, that he was like, okay, I gotta find some solution. And back then, so that was 2016, obviously the Kemper was there, and he was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go into the studio, and he took that guy with him that is the guitar tech. I'm gonna go into the studio. I'm gonna make profiles of my favorite Vox AC30s, like with the best possible mic preamp and mics that I can get. And then what he ended up doing is he was just using one profile with his Kemper and the pedals. Because he was like, I'm so sick and tired of like these things breaking down. And I've heard, again, don't quote me on it, I've heard the only reason why Brian May had a wall of Vox amps, because sometimes in the middle of the show, his technician had to plug into another one because one of them was actually about to break or like losing output power or something. Like,
yeah, there's actually some rig rundown that you can see with Brian May's guitar tech.
Yeah.
So they have a power voltage control.
Oh yeah.
Because the amps like to run at a certain power, right? They have that. They have a bunch of spares. And part of it has to do, like you think about it, they have, for the most part, Celestion Alnico Blues. And from what I understand from the interview I saw, Brian May doesn't use the vintage ones. He's using like the modern ones. So he's not afraid to like put a modern Alnico Blue in his amps. He has the 70th rather anniversary speaker alongside the Blue. So you're talking about an amp that is driving like 30 watts into a 15-watt speaker and a 30-watt speaker. So sometimes the Blue they blow up, so
Right.
they have to change them. So they have a lot of amplifiers. Most of them are modded, and I think they are modded for that very fact, for the reliability. So they change some of the components in there.
Yeah.
Even like the Brian May model, if I'm not mistaken, it's just one volume. There's like no knobs to control anything because he always uses the normal channel.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one volume. Dang, you crank it, and that's it with a treble booster.
Wow.
So, and he's got different ones. He's got the ones from the 70s that a lot of people say are crap, but that's what he has them in the lineup. Of course, there's like the visual aspect. Like you got like 9 amps, right? You're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
No, they're not all plugged in. A lot of them are just for like the look. And then he's got 3 of them that are staggered on the sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's a wet, dry, wet setup.
Oh.
Because he uses like delays.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of when he's doing like the whole Brighton Rock thing, where there's a bit of a call and response, and he harmonizes with the delay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting when you get into it and you see how some people use something like that, like older amps, but still in 2023, he's touring with those. He's using like ping pong delays and all sorts of setup, but essentially his rig is still fairly simple compared to, let's say, I don't know, someone like John Petrucci or, Steve Vai with like big racks. And I mean, those guys, they need a technician to be able to switch everything for them, because that's a hell of a lot of rig to bring on the road with you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So there you go. The reliability factor is has been and tends to continue to be somewhat of an issue for Vox Amps. And when it comes to the thing that we just talked about before, where all the things that people would want Vox to do and to kind of bring into, like regarding features, regarding like some of the things that we have these days that we could easily implement into the Vox platform, but still keep like the kind of spirit of Vox alive in a way, of the spirit of and the sound of Vox. In the meantime, a lot of other companies are doing exactly that. I mean, if we look at some of the companies, you mentioned Matchless being one of the first that really kind of looked at, okay, here's a great sounding amp, but it's failing regularly on stage. What can we do to change that? We've had Bad Cat. Then you look at some of the companies like Morgan Amplification is one of the guys he was really looking into, because he was a huge fan of the Vox AC30 and played it for a long time. But same thing, he was as soon as he was like more interested in actually building amps, he was looking at it, he was like, okay, this needs to go and this needs to go. Why is that in there? And then he starts to create his own versions that sound really well. Then there was a company called, where did I find that? Hayseed, who also did like...
Yeah, I remember those,
AC30 derivates. We had ValveTech is a company that also makes a good AC15 or AC30, but that is a head. It's not a combo, unit. Then what else? Dr. Z made a couple of like EL84 powered amps that kind of bring that Vox kind of vibe into it. Okay, so we had these
Trainwreck amps.
Yeah, Trainwreck.
I heard were based on those.
Yeah, I think the Comet, the Trainwreck Comet, is based on a Vox AC30. So there are a couple of companies who actually make, and I feel weird to say this, but make a kind of a better AC kind of amp than Vox does, because if you look at the Morgan has the power scaling, where you could actually crank this thing up but get the voltage of the power amp down, so you don't have your ears ringing when you try to use that at bedroom volume. So there are companies out there that are implementing these great features, but Vox isn't.
There's also Bad Cat.
Yeah.
That took off. Like, I'm really bad with names, so I hope I'm not saying like I'm inventing someone, but I believe it was Mark Sampson who was over at Bad Cat, not at Bad Cat, but at Matchless, and then went to Bad Cat for a few years. And then I think he started his own company, but I forget what the name of that brand is. There was another company that he started, but Bad Cat essentially started off from kind of like the Matchless kind of vibe. So that's why if you put like a Bad Cat and a Matchless, one beside the other, they're hard to tell apart because they look exactly the same, right? So I have the Hot Cat 30. I'm not sure where it's situated in terms of the circuit, but the clean kind of reminds me of an AC30, but the distortion part of it is just bonkers. It's more like distortion, but I do not like that amplifier whatsoever for the distortion. I love the clean out of it. But the distortion sounds like shit, and the effects loop is one of the worst I've ever dealt with. Okay. And I know that currently, trying to remember his name, John, the new owner, John Thompson. I think it's John Thompson. I suck with names.
Okay.
But anyways, the new current owner of Bad Cat is making a lot of changes to some of the older amps that a lot of people were complaining about.
Okay.
So he's listening to his demographic. They're saying, oh, you know, I have the older version. It sounds great, but I didn't like this. I didn't like that. And they're making modification.
Okay.
And a lot of the modifications, they're really an improvement over the original circuit. So if you want kind of like the Vox vibe, but with something new, more boutique with a lot of options and a great resale value, you probably go for Matchless or Bad Cat or Morgan, companies like that. If you buy a brand new AC30 made by Korg, when you sell it, you don't make much money. Like if you look on the used market, especially here in Belgium, the AC10 is like $400. The AC15 is about 500, and the AC30 is about 650 average for the used market. And you're like, why would I buy an AC10 if I can buy the AC30 for just a couple $100 more? So it's like the resale value is not there on those, but they're still good amps. But they do overheat. They do sometimes, if you buy the lower bracket prices, they do lack a lot of features. Like we were talking about the AC10 earlier. The AC10 from today has nothing to do with the original AC10. Like nothing.
Okay.
The original AC10 had EF86 preamps. The new one is working with 12AX7s. They have really, really small input and output transformers. And my personal belief, I'm not a technician, so I really can't confirm, but I think that the smaller output transformers is giving the amp a lot of distortion. So if you use an AC10 and crank up the distortion, man, they drive like crazy. The AC15 and the AC30 don't drive as much. So I think it's all these choices that they make these amps kind of like new takes on the old circuits, but they're not the same. And a lot of people have written to me, said, you know, I have an AC10 and it gets hot really quickly, and I find I have to change the tubes often. And if you ever see my video where I take the AC10 apart, it's not a well thought out design. Like, okay, they should have really thought, like, you have to take out so many screws just to get to the amplifier and get to the tubes. You can't just stick your hand in there and take them out. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not the most well thought out design. And even the AC15, like, you have so many screws to take out, and then you take it out, and then everything's there. So if from a repair standpoint, I'm sure a technician could fix it quite easily, but the AC10, not so much. It's poorly thought out as far as I'm concerned. But it's and you have this very small gap between the tubes and the speaker, so they're almost touching. I'm thinking, you know, you could have given more of a gap there in the design. They should have thought about, you know, having a cab that would accommodate any speaker choice. So if you want to change a speaker in the AC10, forget about it. You have to stay with a ceramic speaker of about like the same footprint. Because if you want to put an Alnico Blue in there, forget it. It doesn't fit in there.
Yeah, they're too long.
Not unless you take out all the tubes, but then what's the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had that experience with a couple of, so when the whole thing started that everybody needed a compact version of their amp, like a 15-watt version or something, and suddenly everybody had that. Everybody had like a lunchbox amp. That's what they're called, a lunchbox amp.
Yeah.
I experienced the same thing where, for example, there was a lunchbox amp that I'm not gonna name the brand because I don't want to shit on people, but it's like there was an amp that
do it, say it.
No. It's an amp company that we've mentioned in this very podcast. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Okay. And they had an amp that also, apart from the small form factor, had a spring reverb in it. And the issue was that the spring reverb section was too close to the output transformer, and therefore every time you dialed in the reverb, you would have like some weird humming noise coming around, which is like, and at some point I noticed they're not building them in that format factor anymore. They only do the large versions so that there's enough space and enough distance between the spring reverb and the output transformer. But yeah, getting to the output transformer point, that's exactly what Morgan does with a lot of their designs, and especially also with the AC designs, where they're like, okay, that's a great sounding amp, but this needs more balls. It just needs to have more headroom, needs to have like more like power, especially in the lower frequencies. So what they did is they put in huge output transformers. I think Morgan is still using Mercury Mechanics. Mercury Mechanics? I don't know. Mercury. They're called Mercury. Mercury is the company that makes the output transformers. They are huge and they're making a huge sound. And that's, to your points, like small output transformer. Yeah, at some point, obviously, you're lacking headroom. And then when you go in there with a hot guitar or with hot pickups or with a pedal in front of it, or you really drive it to a certain point, it's going to distort like hell. Just has to do with the output transformer.
And that point you just made is super important, because for people who've written to me said, should I get an AC10 or an AC15? It depends. Are you using pedals? Because if you use pedals, don't go with the AC10. It doesn't react the same way. There's not enough headroom there. So if you use something like, let's say, I don't know, a Tube Screamer or a Klon type pedal, you might be fine. But if you get in with a fuzz, forget it. The whole thing just caves in on itself. So the AC10 is more like for the people that are, I just use a guitar and an amp and I just get everything from the amp. That's a perfect amplifier for that. But if you start to incorporate pedals, it's that's where that particular amp starts to fall apart. But the thing is that the sound is great, and I think that's the main takeaway I have from the whole Korg era Vox thing, is that they still sound like Vox. They don't sound like a different amplifier. Sure, internally they might be completely different, but they've managed to encapsulate the sound of a Vox and at an affordable price. But the thing is that they could still just like pony up just a little bit on the goodies that they offer with the amplifiers, because today's musicians are looking for, the effects loop. I personally don't use effects loop, but some people really need it, especially if they're getting all the gain from the amplifier and that they want to use reverb or delays. They don't want to distort those, right?
No.
But if you want that, you can't be with the AC15, so that means you have to buy the AC30. If you play small gigs, you might not want the AC30. And I mean, in terms of volume, one is 15 watts, the other's 30 watt, but what's the difference in decibels? I don't know. But one of them's got 2 speakers, so I'm sure the perceived loudness is going to be louder with the AC30.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying, is that the thing that these other companies are doing is listening to what people want, and Vox is kind of listening to how can we innovate? What can we do different? So they're coming up with all this gear that sometimes the consumers are not really asking for.
Yeah.
So that to your point, where the criticism that you're bringing about Vox, I think is a good one. They're making good amplifiers, but they're not making what I think is what people want today.
Yeah, Yeah, 100% agree. That's why we have all these companies who look at like some of the flaws and some of the missing elements to those amps, and then like, okay, I'm gonna come out with a version that's A, completely handmade, B, like erases all the flaws, and then C, but like kind of maintains what this amplifier is really about. I've once tried the Morgan AC20. It's an amazing amp. It's an amazing amplifier. Sounds so great. However, there's another aspect to Vox amps that you mentioned earlier, and something we actually talked about like a couple of weeks ago. Some people say that a Vox needs to be a combo. Like the Vox AC30 only sounds great in that same like chassis where you have like the amplifier and the speakers in one enclosure, and it doesn't sound as great if you have a head and use it with a different cab because of the way the whole thing resonates. I'm not sure. Some people say that. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, what sounds better? What sounds... I mean, it's really a matter of preference, but I think that the word I keep using throughout this podcast is tradition, like the traditionalist. They want the Alnico blue, right? They want the cab that goes along with it because they're looking for that specific tone. Personally, I don't give two shits. Like, for me, I'm using the head because I like the voicing, but I'm going to use whatever speaker I feel like it. I'm going to be one of those people who's going to say something very outrageous, but I find the V30 to be probably the best speaker I've tried with a Vox.
Interesting. Because
if you use fuzz and you use distortion, the V30 performs super well. It handles the volume. And to my point here, that's what Bad Cat uses with their amplifiers. They use the V30s. They remove the doping around the speaker just to get that more broken in sound. But if you use today's like Vox, not Vox, but Celestion V30s with an AC30 or with the AC15, it sounds great. And when you consider that the V30 is kind of like the next step up from the Alnico Blue, like the lineage of it, the DNA is kind of coming from that. So when you consider that, you go, okay, so if I remember right, the V30 was kind of sold as this perfected Alnico Blue when it first came out. Yep. Sonically, they're very different, but in an AC30 or AC15, the V30 is stellar, but it doesn't have the chime that everyone's looking for. It doesn't have the more boxy mids that are reminiscent of old Vox amplifier. It's more of a modern take on it. I also prefer over the Alnico Blue, the greenback, because I play a lot of fuzz. But the Alnico Blue, if you play that with a Vox and you're just using barely any distortion and you have a really clean single coil guitar, you really get that old sound that people are after.
Okay.
And I think that is part of the equation. We're talking like speakers, we're talking the cab. It's really a matter of preference. Like I have this really old cab beside me here that we can't see off screen, but it's what they used to call the Super Twin. So it was basically like an oversized AC30 cabinet. And if you looked at the construction, it's cheap. It's not, by today's standard, this is not a high quality cabinet. But it's got a sound, you know, the way that the half open back is on the back of this amplifier. And like I told you, like the speakers I put in this thing for the AC50, I have the 70th anniversary in a greenback. Why? Because they sound fantastic with a Vox style amplifier. So some people are gonna, say, no, you need the Alnico Blue. Yeah, if you do Beatles, if you do like U2 stuff like that, maybe. But for what I do, I tend to do more higher gain stuff. I prefer a speaker that doesn't seem to cut off like the high end the same way that an Alnico Blue will do. And the cabinet, I mean, you can have small, big, depends what frequency response you're looking from the amplifier. But I'm not a traditionalist, so I'm probably not the right person to ask. about like how to get like the right speaker and cab combination, I'm like, I'll use whatever the hell I have.
Yeah.
Simply put.
Okay, I get that. Yeah, it's funny though. We talked about the cabinet. I think the Vox AC30 or like Vox amps or Vox type amps for that matter is one of the amplifiers where the speaker selection is more crucial than with other amps, in my opinion. Whenever I played a Marshall, I was able to play it with greenbacks. Sounds great, depending on the Marshall, and depending on the kind of sound you're going for, obviously. I was able to play it with V30s. Yeah, it's a different color. It's a bit more like mid-nosy in a way. I was able to play it with G1275 or 65. But then again, G1265s also sound really, really great. The creambacks, they also sound really great with Fender type amps. You know, so there's a mix and blend and swap. You can do a lot of things, but I feel like with the Vox, there are speakers that you can absolutely use, and then it's a question of preference and your like personal perception. But there are speakers you cannot use with a Vox because it's going to be unanimous. Everybody's going to say it sounds terrible.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the gatekeepers, like the people who tell you what a Vox is supposed to sound like. I've made, I don't know, over 400 videos on my YouTube channel, and sometimes I have to use impulse responses, and I've used everything. The G1265, the creambacks, the Alnico Blue, the V30s, and never, ever have I ever had anyone say, "You sound like shit. You're not using the right speaker, man. I can tell." No one. So that's why I call BS, because I think it's really a matter of preference. If you play mostly clean and you're looking for that, like Beatles or Rolling Stone, Rory Gallagher, whatever, yeah, you need the Alnico Blue. I agree. It's part of that sound, if that's what you're looking for. But there's a new breed of guitar players that are not about the Beatles. They're not about the 1960s. They're about the now.
Yeah.
And you got musicians like Dashboard Confessional, Thrice, all these new bands that are using Vox, and they have nothing to do with the 1960s. They are current bands from right now. They're using modern guitars, modern pedals. They use whatever the hell comes with the amp. Even Vox at some point, I mentioned it earlier, came out with a AC15 that had a WGS speaker in there that had nothing to do with the greenback or the blue.
Right.
It was a completely different speaker, and apparently it sounds great. Traditionalists will tell you, nope, it's not the real thing because it doesn't have the right speaker. Change it if you want. You know, it's a matter of what the person's looking for. Like I said, I play a lot of fuzz. I love fuzz, and I also love high gain pedals. And with the Alnico Blue, it's a great sounding speaker, but it doesn't sound exactly the way I want it for that style of music. Now, if I'm going with a Klon or maybe some subtle distortion, it sounds actually great with the Arc of Tone. But the Arc of Tone sounds great with any speaker I throw at it and any amplifier I throw at it. But some amps are more picky with the speaker depending on what style you play. So let's say you get a fuzz face into an old 1960s AC30 and you compare that to, let's say, a JMP45. People are going to be like, ugh, I'm going to prefer the Marshall because I've heard that combination before, but with the AC30, doesn't sound as good. Change the speaker in the AC30. You might see a hell of a difference in how the amplifier reacts. So that's why I'm saying, like, my point of view is not traditionalist. Like I try and serve people what they want to hear, but at the same time, my opinion is, okay, you love the Alnico Blue, you love the smaller cabinet, or you love the AC30 cabinet. I've tried my amps with 4x12s, 1x12s. I throw anything at it because I want to see what the amp is capable of. And if people thought more like that, I think maybe Vox would have more variety in terms of what they're offering. But because a lot of us are more traditionalists towards this company, I think they don't have the same creative outlet in terms of what they can come up with than, let's say, someone like Marshall or someone like Fender. You know, I think that might be the thing, but I could be wrong. Like, this is just my opinion. I'm not an expert on this stuff. It's just what I see and what I play and all that. But yeah, I think for the speaker, play whatever. As soon as you find what works, man, just roll with it.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it's I think it remains to be seen what Korg, as the owner of the Vox brand, is going to come up with in the next years to kind of counter what's happening with some of these boutique companies that, in my opinion, they're doing everything right. You know, even if you look at a company like Synergy that we mentioned at the beginning, where they have these modules. One of the modules is the AC module, which obviously is a recreation of what Morgan did with the AC20. I tried it once. It sounds really, really great. I actually preferred it over playing an AC30 from Vox. So it remains to be seen if at some point maybe kind of Vox reaches out to their community and says, okay, guys, what do you want to see from us? You know, what do you want us to do? What would make you and maybe others, you know, tip you over to the point where, like, okay, now I want an original Vox amp because it finally suits me and my playing situation. Let's put it this way. But you also mentioned Marshall and Fender, and right now it seems like everybody is still broken out into so many different terrains. Like, I mean, Marshall recently got bought by this Swedish company, and now for the first time in the history, the Marshall family is not owning Marshall anymore.
I did not know that.
Remains to be seen. Yes, like I don't know what it's called, but they were already involved because of the of that whole Marshall Bluetooth speaker thing that so they were kind of behind it. We're partnering with that company, and they've acquired Marshall, like I think 6 months ago or something. Not so sure, but it happened inside this year. So Marshall is now owned by this Swedish company that is definitely more successful with these boom boxes, these Bluetooth boom boxes, and headphones, exactly. So, and we'll see if, you know, if they're going to, like, kind of what kind of direction they're going into. If it's going to be, we want to make Marshall great again. Now I sound like.
Oh no, you didn't.
Oh shit. Oh god. Oh god. Imagine that. Imagine Donald Trump talking about
with the red cap and the whole thing. Oh no.
Exactly. We're gonna make Marshall great again. It's gonna be amazing. We're gonna build a wall of Marshalls. And we're gonna have Fender pay for it. Okay?
Awesome. I love it. I love it. I can't do Donald Trump impressions, but you're pretty good.
Exactly. Yeah. I once had the idea with a friend of mine that we're going to do like gear reviews, but like only impressions of famous people. And I think at some point we pictured Donald Trump and Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about gear, where he said something like, we're going to build a wall of Marshalls and we're going to have Fender pay for it, okay? And then he said, Donald, what are you talking about?
Dude, I would love a skit like that.
That'd be
great. That
would be fun, right? Yeah, so I don't know if...
That little bit you just did has to be one of our shorts.
Okay.
It has to be.
Gonna build a beautiful wall. Yeah.
Wall of
Marshalls. Yeah.
Nice.
It remains to be seen what all these companies are going to go with in the future. I mean, we see Fender kind of going, like, being more serious about their way into the modeling and digital domain, which is well, remains to be seen what's happening. In the meantime, other companies who have like a more boutique approach, including Mojotone, who I consider a boutique amp company because all their stuff is made on turret boards by hand in Malaysia, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
I've played a couple of these amps and they all sound great. And I haven't heard anyone complaining about them not being reliable on stage. So in the meantime, all these other companies are making exact replicas or even improved replicas of these iconic amps, and they're doing well. And I see kind of, you know, the reputation for the bigger companies like fading away a little bit, which is concerning for the legacy. But on the other end, you know, whatever sounds great and is affordable for me is the thing that I'm going for. And I don't care if it says Marshall, if it says Fender, if it says, you know.
I see it. And here's something I'm kind of going to throw out there, but I think that this concept where Marshall and Fender and all these companies are trying to stay relevant, I think that has to do, like, I'm trying to think in real time here and, you know, formulate this idea, but I think it has to do with the fact that they have to stay relevant. So that means that they have to keep an output of new products all the time. So, I mean, try to imagine, like, I'm going to get back to food here, but try to imagine Burger King or McDonald's, right? They're not reinventing new foods. They're just repurposing what they already have and presenting it a different way. And they're not going out of business anytime soon. But the music industry kind of works in a very different way. Yeah. So every quarter or whatever, people expect something new. So that's where you get like something like this. So, you know, Wampler puts out a Germanium version. Some people are going to say that's stupid. Some people are going to think that it's brilliant. Some other people are going to be another clone, you know, who cares? I think it's brilliant. Some other people might not think so, but there's a market for that. Where I think that the companies need to stay relevant sometimes, especially someone like Vox, is what are people looking for? They're looking for the old stuff. They want to have the old stuff, but they don't want to pay the price of the vintage gear. If they had some kind of new technology that came out and they had done impulse responses of like coveted Vox amplifiers, could you imagine what doors they would open? They wouldn't have to reinvent a new product. They'd have like something like a Kemper, like a Vox version of the Kemper, and you could go on there and you could buy not impulse responses, but profiles of, let's say, an AC50, an AC30, whatever amplifier, and they could get their hands on some of those old amps from well-known musicians, from other people. They could find like choice amplifiers and speakers and all this stuff. And they could find their own technology and then offer that. And then people like me who have amps at home, we could profile our own Vox, and then Vox would have their own profiling thing or modeling or whatever. And I don't know why they haven't gone that route, because it seems to be what people are into. Like, we don't want to keep spending on new amplifiers all the time, especially like big amps that are super powerful. You can't bring those most of the time, but you still want the sound. So perhaps, I'm just shooting this out there, but maybe if Vox and other companies thought about what made them great to begin with, you know, some of those vintage iconic amps, and they found a way to model those and give the best sound you could, but with a new technology, something that represents like 2023, 2024 moving forward. Maybe that's how they could stay relevant without having to do all this research and development about new pedals and new amps and new guitars and new this and that. So I don't know. I'm just kind of shooting the shit there on that one. But
I think
that's what I'm thinking.
I think it's actually, it's a good thought, and I think it's also like a nice sort of closing statement on that topic, especially the point you made. Like, all these companies, all these iconic companies, should really look into like what made them popular in the first place, and what made them people wanting their stuff, and then stick with it, but kind of go forward with what technology is offering. which is something that we talked about in the beginning that Soldano did. You know, they took an amp that was had a great form factor, and they kind of added a certain flexibility, like sonically, but they've also added the possibility to use IR, so you can use this thing at home and connect it directly to your audio interface. You can play in a band, and with the headroom it has, you can even play in a fully equipped band with a drummer. You can play in a loud band with that, and you're still going to be heard. So, yeah, and I see that happening a lot with the products that are coming from boutique amp distribution. So, I guess that should be the way forward for these companies like Vox, Fender, Marshall, you name it. Like, look at what made you an iconic company and then stick with that instead of, you know, like bringing a new Strat every year, which is not that different, that different from the Strat that was last year. Maybe from the color, or maybe it has like new pickups in it. But it's like, nobody's going to upgrade. It's not an iPhone, okay? It's not an iPhone or a Samsung or something.
No, that's the thing. Yeah. Yeah, and this might be a topic for a future podcast as well. Is we talked about saturation in the previous podcast, and saturation comes, I think, like, I'm not an expert on marketing here, but if you offer the same thing in different colors, okay, you have the same product in different colors. If you're offering the same product with different names on it and different prices, it's still the same product. So people are going to go for either the more expensive or the cheaper one, but you're not offering anything different. And that's where we get this saturation, right? It's like, oh, I built this new amp. What is it? Well, it's an American sound. Is it a Fender? It's a California sound. Is it Fender or is it Mesa? Like, you're trying to find out what it is. Yeah. It's more Mesa, but we put our own spin on it. Okay, and then you look at the amp and it looks exactly like a Fender Deluxe. Has nothing different. It sounds, you know, pretty much like a Fender Deluxe. And you go, okay, someone's going to want that, but you haven't brought anything that makes your amp different from what Fender is making. And because you have smaller runs, your amp sells for more money. Not everyone can afford that. Yeah, but it's a good amp. I'm sure it is.
Has to be.
But the problem is that you're not offering anything that entices me to purchase your amp. Because there's nothing different about it. Maybe you have a different choice of speaker, but I can change the speaker in my Fender Deluxe any time of the week. So I think that, and I make it sound like I'm being sarcastic or hard on the companies, and that's not what it is. It's more of a, how would I say this? It's more of the struggle for the industry is to stay relevant. And in order to stay relevant, they always have to use something that they know is a sure sell, but repurpose it a different way. And then you hope that someone somewhere goes, I needed a new Klon, or I needed a new Tube Screamer, or a new Big Muff, or whatever. Right. But a lot of people, like myself, as soon as you found the one, you're like, well, I don't need another one. I don't need another Big Muff. I don't need another Fuzz Face. I got great ones. So you put out a new one and you listen to it. You go, yeah, it sounds good. And it's got a great price, but I'm already satisfied with that. You have anything else to offer?
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's kind of where we are in 2023 is that if you come up with something, you have to come up with something kind of like that Soldano, where it almost kind of reminded me of Rev. You know how Rev, they have, you know, some really modern accoutrements in there? That Soldano kind of reminded me of that, right? You can go direct. You don't even need a load box or anything. So I think that's where we're going. And companies that are not doing that, they're going to find a way to adapt to it, hopefully. But like you said, if they go the way of the dodo bird, that's capitalism for you. The cream rises to the top, and if you don't stay relevant, it sucks. It really sucks, but that's what happens.
It does. It's true. Yeah. Well, I've learned a lot about Vox that I didn't know before in this podcast. And yeah, it's good that for this topic, and for many other topics as well. We're like on total different sides or like dots on the spectrum, because this way we can learn from each other, and you guys out there can participate. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, we've reached another 2 hours of podcasting with this episode. Fair to cut this here, and to let you in on something that so after only 3 episodes, we actually caught the attention of some people that were like, hey, you know, you want to do a podcast with me? And so for next week's episode, we actually have our first guest. So next week, we are going to talk to Chris Jupiter from Jupiter Effects on a couple of topics. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that he sees happening in the industry. And we're going to do the news section with him as well. So we have 3 people who can throw in their opinion on current news. So that's happening next week.
It's awesome.
Thanks everybody for watching. Again, you can follow us and subscribe on YouTube, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you get a notification. For those people who don't like to hit the bell icon, we are going to release a new podcast episode every Thursday at 10 a.m. Central European Time. And for people who like to listen on the way or in the car, we're also on Spotify. You can listen to this podcast on Spotify as well. So, until next week.
And yes, one more thing. Yeah. For those who don't have time to sit through a 2-hour-long podcast, we're also making clips where we highlight specific subjects throughout the podcast. Up till now, the way it looks is that we're going to have the clips at least once a week. But as we make more content, it might come out every day of the week, because we're going to have a lot of content coming up, because every week we're filming a new podcast. We have new guests coming. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff. So it's kind of like the whole Joe Rogan thing, where he has the long format, but then also has the 6, sometimes 15-minute long clip. We're going to be doing that too, just to highlight some of the more interesting aspects of our podcast.
Nice. Very good. Awesome. So yeah, it was nice doing this with you again. And yeah, looking forward to next week to then actually, talk again and also talk with our first guest.
Cool. All right. Thanks for tuning in.
See you guys. Bye.